Grid Legends. Is this racing game ahead of the pack?
Let's race it in, push them over the edge there.
Or does it stall before even getting off the starting grid?
Yeah!
Will this game make you feel like a true racing legend? Or make you wish you hadn't bothered? Stick around if you're interested in finding out if this game is worth your time and money. My name's Dale and welcome to D&DGaming. Joining me in the review as always is my brother Dav. So Dav, what's your first thoughts on this one?
I'd heard of the Grid game series before but not played any. They've always had that arcade racer look to them, which mostly put me off as I tend to prefer racing games with more depth. But having now played this one, I was quite surprised. I'll explain a bit more shortly.
I'd also heard of the Grid series before, but not played any of them. The developer, Codemasters, do have a fairly solid history of racing games, and the Dirt Rally series is great, but they have generally always been a bit arcade-like and console-focused, and not really simulator games. Unfortunately, I noticed Codemasters were brought out by EA in 2021, and so can't say I'm too confident about their future. As for this game, I did expect it to be a bit console focused and arcade-like, and I wasn't wrong, but that doesn't make it a bad game by any means.
So in terms of graphic options, I was quite glad to see a really decent range of graphics to tweak and adjust to your PC specs from a basic and advanced menu. The basic menu is very basic, with just vertical sync, HDR and motion blur. However, the advanced menu goes deeper into lighting, texture and shadow quality, vehicle and mirror reflections, weather effects and crowds, all of which have low, medium, high and ultra high settings. These can be more generally tweaked using a relevant preset, or they can be adjusted individually as a more custom setup. Really glad to see the developer included this level of graphic adjustments.
Yeah, there is a good range of graphic options once you get into the advanced menu, and certainly enough to be able to adjust it to your liking. I did customise some of the options to make it run a bit smoother, but the default settings work mostly fine as well.
As for graphics and graphics performance, our PC specs are up on screen as usual, and the game ran smoothly on my PC on the ultra high preset setting. As for the graphics themselves, I thought the in-game graphics were really good, certainly nothing noticeably bad. The cars look detailed inside and out, and the environment, racetracks and crowds all look good. One thing to note here is that the cutscenes in the story mode of the game are filmed and not produced graphically in a game engine. Personally, I'm not sure this worked well as the best approach. There's too much contrast between the real-life filming and the in-game graphics, and this was just made more apparent by switching back and forth and kind of broke immersion for me. I feel it could have been done much better if it was done in-game, such as in the Need for Speed games. I'm mostly thinking of the way it was done in Need for Speed Most Wanted, which worked really well in first-person view and kept up the immersion.
Now get out of the car.
Attention Patrol Division. Units are in a high-speed pursuit of multiple vehicles, aggressively evading custody. Units in the area directed to clear and head up to provide cover.
Next time, you won't be so lucky.
The game ran really well on my system, and although I did tweak some of the graphics options to my liking, the default settings were actually very good, and it ran very smoothly for such a nice looking game with a lot to process on the screen. The graphics looked great, and I was immediately impressed with how good it looked and how well optimised it was. I didn't have any graphics issues whatsoever, and so I was really impressed by the graphics performance overall. The car models and tracks looked great, and the weather effects such as the rain were very realistic looking. So in terms of player controls, the default controls on keyboard threw me off a little, as you have to use the comma/left arrow for left and full stop/right arrow for right. I changed these to WASD, which felt more natural. Granted, these games are not designed for keyboard, but I've got quite used to playing racing games on my keyboard and mouse, and I even play Assetto Corsa with mouse and keyboard, so I've just got used to it. I do mean to pick up a racing wheel at some point, but we'll see about that one. As you'd expect, most standard USB wheels will work with this game, and this would obviously be the preferred option if you have one.
So for me, the controls are typical racing game controls. For me, I use my wired Xbox controller connected to my PC to provide a commentary on the controller option in contrast to Dale's comments on the keyboard controls. For the Xbox controller, the default controls are left thumbstick for car direction, right trigger for accelerator, left trigger for brake, A and X to change up and down gears respectively, B for handbrake, and Y for flashback, which is basically a reverse time function to replay part of the race if you fuck up. All pretty standard, to be honest. So in terms of game modes, there's a number of modes including story mode, career mode, quick race mode, and race creator mode. For the story mode, this begins immediately when you first start up the game and you're thrust straight into the racing seat. In the story mode, you play as Driver 22. You've just been hired by Seneca, a new up-and-coming race team trying to break through into the Pro League, and you race alongside your teammate Yumi Tanaka. You start as a rookie and you build your driver level through experience points towards Pro level. Each race in the story mode has an objective, and this is usually things like finish better than a particular position in the race or get in front and stay in front of a particular opponent. Whilst mentioning the story mode, it's worth noting that there are a number of story modes selectable from the main menu. However, only one season is included in the main game, and the other seasons are behind a paywall, which only becomes apparent when you go to select one. A frustrating function of modern gaming that is applied in one way or another to so many games now. Buy the game for full price, but oh actually we're only going to give you part of the game, the rest of the content you'll have to pay us more for. I'll stop short of going into a full rant on this one, but it did affect my overall scoring of this game. So in terms of the career mode, you start with rookie difficulty, and completing this unlocks the next difficulty and so on. Each difficulty has cup challenge races set across multiple rounds where you race against AI opponents to win the rounds and meet the objectives. Quick race mode, well, it's pretty self-explanatory, and race creator mode allows you to create and host your own events. One thing to note across all the game modes is the game difficulty. You can select from easy, medium, hard, expert or legend, and also tweak AI difficulty, transmission mode, and racing line amongst other settings within these to make a custom difficulty. The story mode throws you straight into the game, but when I got the chance to select the mode, I selected hard initially. This was still too easy. Even in this mode by default, it has a racing line indicator on the track and transmission is still automatic. In order for there to be any type of challenge and intensity to the racing, I had to run on a custom difficulty mode. I had the racing line switched off, AI difficulty set to hard, transmission set to manual sequential, clutch override disabled, damage level set to full, and terminal damage enabled. I also always drive in driving seat view behind the wheel. It's typically more difficult, but to me it's more realistic than any of the third person views. Don't get me wrong, I'm not boasting here. There's a lot of people who will set difficulty even harder than I did, but I just wanted to point out for anyone that's used to racing games, you'll likely need to switch up some of these settings from the outset to get any type of challenge and intense race out of this game. It's just boring and far too easy otherwise.
I also found the starting difficulty to be too low and had to adjust it early on in my playthrough. In terms of driver aids, I started with the default aids on, including racing line and the AI on medium, but then as I started to get used to the tracks and the feel of the cars, I slowly backed off all the driver aids to 1 and up the AI to hard, as this made it much more of a challenge and more enjoyable for me. I do feel the default settings here just started off way too easy. I know it might be their target audience is a lower age and would find it too difficult, but yeah, it was just too easy for me. I also went for the cockpit view early on and stuck with that view for the better realism.
So in terms of UI, this can be broken into driving UI and menu UI. Starting with the driving UI, this gives you all the information you need and typical stuff you see in a racing game. Racing position, number of laps completed remaining, race, current, lap and best lap times, a real-time map of the track and a speedometer. It also includes a points counter where it tells you points collected in real time for staying on a racing line, drifting or power sliding, overtaking and many more. Personally, I found the UI to be very intrusive. All the text felt like it was far too large on the screen and massively reduced the view. They also felt like there was a double up with the speedometer if you were in the first person view, which I personally prefer to race in. Obviously it's needed in other views, but for behind the wheel view, all you need to do is look down at the car's actual speedometer, so the additional overlay one feels unnecessary in this view.
The UI did add to the arcadey feel of the game for me, and it does have a lot of pop-up text telling you things such as whether you're following the racing line and the points you're earning throughout the race, as Dav mentioned. It wasn't terrible though, and I did get used to it quite quickly. Some of it is also customizable, such as removing the mini-map if you do want to clear a screen. In terms of the menu UI, this was okay, but it was clear here that the game is predominantly focused on the console crowd, as there are some odd key bindings such as having to use F3 and F4 to navigate certain menus rather than having more mouse control in these areas. I did find there was a bit much going on in the main menu area as well, as there seemed to be a lot of clutter, but I got used to it quick enough. So in terms of sound and music, all the sounds were as expected for a racing game, and nothing stood out in a bad way at all. The cars themselves sounded good, which is key for a racing game, and they mostly all had unique engine sounds. I did find the music could be quite generic at times, so that would be a slight negative from me.
Yeah, the same. I felt the music was pretty generic. It did feel fitting for the game though at times, and helped to build up the suspense of a race too. I found the game sounds good, cars revving through the gears to the limiter sounded authentic, screeching tyres on corners, crunches and whacks when hitting other racers or track barriers. Certainly nothing bad here, but as expected from a modern racing game really. So in terms of bugs and glitches, I didn't notice any bugs on my playthrough.
No, me neither. I didn't notice any bugs or glitches, which is always a plus.
So to sum up, things I liked about the game. I really like the mixture of racing styles involved in the initial story mode, including GT and Le Mans style cars, electric racing cars, brawlers, classic cars, tarmac track rally cars, and open top cars. The racing types within the story mode were also really varied, including circuit, point-to-point, eliminator, drift challenge, and more. These helped to keep the mode interesting and varied. Graphics were really good, and it helped with a good range of adjustable settings in the graphics menu. Car damage was depicted really well, and there were no bugs or graphical issues that I came across. The ability to really tweak the difficulty settings to suit a player's ability was a real plus, and it's possible to use these settings to test and hone driving skills, gradually reducing the driving aids applied. The game sound and music were really good and helped to intensify the racing and keep immersion going.
As for things I liked about the game, the graphics looked really great and the game just ran very well. It really is very well optimised, and even with an older CPU like mine, it just ran smoothly. I suspect this is because the actual physics in the game are nowhere near a simulator level, and so the processing power isn't actually that high. So as long as you've got a half decent graphics card, you're probably going to be okay. If you go into this knowing that it will be an arcade-like game, then you won't be disappointed with how it looks. I thought the range of cars and manufacturer licenses was great. I had fun just scrolling through the cars, admiring how nice they looked in the menu. The range of tracks was also great, and although there's not so much focus on classic tracks such as Monza, Spa, and Le Mans, they were all done very well in other games, and so it's nice to have more of the street racing type tracks in this one. Another positive for me was that it was just good fun to play. It's not really demanding at all, and so you can easily get into the groove and just have fun racing without too much pressure, as the difficulty is certainly not high at all.
So in terms of things I didn't like about the game, UI was too intrusive in my opinion, and the speedometer doubled up in the first person view. It could have been switched off or hidden in this view to avoid the double up, and the UI in general could have been a bit smaller. I know there were some adjustments you could make, but I do feel the default could have been a bit better laid out. I didn't think the switching between real life filming for the cutscenes and the game graphics for racing worked in my opinion. I think this could have been done better all in game as mentioned earlier. I didn't really like the way that in the story mode you just play as driver 22. It felt a bit impersonal and pulled the immersion away a little bit. I've left the worst bit for last, the paywall for content. If these seasons were advertised as separate DLCs and sold to gamers in that way, then fine, but the way it looked in the base game is that you can access them, but then you're hit with a paywall, which in my opinion is misleading and just leads to frustration and avoidance rather than, oh that looks good, I'll buy it, which I would be far more likely to do if it was advertised as a DLC in the first place.
In terms of things I didn't like, one negative for me was that I thought the rain would have had a big impact on the driving feel, but the only real challenge it adds is seeing through the windscreen if the camera is on the interior view. The rain looked great, but added nothing to the feel of the car, and I quickly realised I could drive as normal, absolutely flying around corners with loads of grip without worrying at all. As I turned down the drive rays, this did make a bit of difference, but not enough in my opinion, so it would have been nice to see the weather effects have more impact on the actual driving. As I've pointed out several times already, it is simply a very arcadey-like game, and far from a sim racer. Whilst this does have some positives that I mentioned, it also means that it's incredibly unrealistic. I play quite a bit of Assetto Corsa, which has incredible physics, and you're most likely to go flying off on the first corner, as it really takes some time to master that game. But this was just too arcadey in my opinion, and it would have been nice if they'd found more of a middle ground, perhaps like in the Dirt Rally games. Sometimes I thought the story mode doesn't really make sense. For example, I was winning all races, placing first, but the narrative would be saying stuff like, Seneca is so close, but they're really going to have to up their game in the next race, or something like that. I was thinking, what the hell? I'm winning every race. How are we still the underdogs?
So in terms of scores, what do you think on this one, Dale?
Well, I thought Grid Legends is a decent, middle-of-the-road racing game with fun, if somewhat shallow gameplay, a great range of cars and tracks, and awesome graphics. That being said, it has a somewhat forgettable story mode and strays a bit too far into arcade territory for my liking. If you're happy with just a fun and fast-paced racing game, then Grid Legends is worth a spin. If you want a more serious racing challenge, then you'll be best looking elsewhere. With all this in mind, I'm giving it a 7 out of 10.
So for me, it's fair to say that overall Grid Legends surprised me and changed my view on the game series. I would certainly consider checking out any future games in the series. Once I upped the difficulty, the racing was challenging and intense at times, with opponents taking no prisoners and wiping me out when the opportunity arose. It was varied in track types, racing types and vehicles, and this kept up my attention and immersion. The graphics were good and the music and sound was on the ball too. My only real issues with the game are related to the over-the-top UI scaling, the way the story mode cutscenes are initiated, and the paywall for the content that looks like it's included in the base game, the latter of which really brings the score down for me. However, if you're a racing game fan and haven't checked out the Grid series, I would recommend you do. Therefore, on balance, I'm giving Grid Legends a 7.5 out of 10.
Well guys, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and comment. Hit that bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video, and we'll see you in the next one.